Hello, beautiful people. Hopefully, everyone can hear me. I am joined today by AURON MACINTYRE. Very, very pleased it is so. And I hope that in the course of our discussion today, all of us will be able to get a glimpse into the world of journalism. I almost hesitate to say the word journalist in this context because Mr. MACINTYRE certainly doesn't fall into the category that we generally set aside for journalists, but he is working with the pros and the big time these days. And he's sort of worked his way up from doing, things on Twitter and having his own channel on YouTube before all of this happened. So I figured this is an excellent opportunity to sort of, get a view from the inside. Before we get started, please do follow this channel, Semi-Agog, as well as A Safer Space. You can do that on YouTube. You can do it on Odyssey. You can do it on BitChute. Please follow me over on Telegram and on Twitter. Unfortunately, I received a channel strike for something that was some forbidden words that were uttered and detected by an algorithm. I was unable to win my appeal, which means that down in the description box below, where I posted links for AURON's stuff, all of the links, I am told, are dead until that strike lapses. So please do follow AURON over on Twitter. His handle over there is at AURON MACINTYRE, AURON MACINTYRE. You can also find him, same name, same spelling, just like you see on screen here on YouTube. So I apologize, AURON, that I'm unable to have your links be active at present. Welcome, sir.
Oh, thanks for having me, man. I appreciate the caveat on the journalist, though. I used to have in the profile a recovering journalist. I'm making amends, going through the 12 steps. Making sure I'm repairing the people I hurt. In my past life. So
Yeah, you have to get in touch with each one of them and give them an individual apology. As I understand it, you have you had a background in journalism earlier on, working for a paper or some such, and then correct me if I'm wrong. You stepped out of that world for a time and then returned.
yeah. So I mean, I've done a couple different things. I got a political science degree out of college, and it turns out there's not a lot of political science jobs. So I taught. I taught for a number of years. I did work in politics for a few years, Republican politics, that kind of thing. And then I ended up as a political journalist through kind of a bit of happenstance. I had a buddy who was working at a local paper. He knew some people who needed to fill in certain articles. He had seen me write a few things on politics before, and so I did a couple worked kind of piecemeal as a freelance journalist. Eventually, I got hired on as a staff writer, became a senior staff writer, and then went back to teaching a little while before I ended up doing what I'm doing now.
And in having been involved in it before, and then having a hiatus of some length between then and now, are there any things that you could say you noticed in terms of differences, changes that had occurred since the time when you dropped out and the time when you came back? I ask because this is a period where we're seeing enormous changes in media. Once upon a time, we heard that the interwebs would kill newspapers, and indeed they did. Print circulation papers just sort of disappeared. But it seems as though we're now moving into a period where um, everything is shifting, and we're seeing things like Fox drop, CNN drop, some of these major big names. So I guess first thing out of the gate is what differences did you notice, if any, between the time when you used to do this kind of work and now?
Well, definitely quite a bit. Like you said, when I was in print journalism, the idea was everything's going to go video, everything's going to be YouTube, everything's going to be that kind of stuff, and that print journalism was probably just going to fade away. Now we saw a lot of things move online during my time as a journalist. I wrote for my freelance writing was for actual traditional physical papers, but the one that I ended up writing for as a senior staff writer was completely online, even though it was a local paper, and that's where all of its news got done. Now we've noticed that even though a lot of people have attempted to move completely into the video space, that thinking that that's going to be all that there is, that hasn't really happened. That transition hasn't exactly worked. Yes, things are no longer physical print media, but people still want to read the written word. Sometimes they don't always want to be watching videos. Turns out there's certain types of journalism that doesn't actually work in the video format. But what we're really seeing, like you said, is the collapse of some of these larger outlets, the CNNs, the Foxes. They're losing large amounts of kind of the audience share, and we're obviously seeing a lot of people moving to alternative media. They look for different voices. They're looking for things kind of outside of the 24-hour news cycle. And so I think things have shifted quite a bit. Though it's a little strange because I would say I was a journalist originally. I was actually reporting on things. That was my job. Today, I'm much more in the commentary sphere. I'm not doing investigative journalism. I'm not going and kind of trying, at least attempting to be neutral on things. I'm specifically commenting and giving opinions. So it's a big shift in my experience as well, of course.
And do you have any kind of, well, I should provide a little bit of background for this. One of the reasons that I thought this would be so interesting is that you're now fully in this world, and there are so many people in our circles who run their channels, who are attempting to get some traction and get their voice out there in the world. And so, that just for everyone who's listening, and for you as well, that's part of the context of why I'm asking these questions. Some people focus heavily on Substack. Somebody like Eugipius, right? Other people focus more on video. I think there are a fair number of people who produce content for both. They'll basically write up a script that will work for the audio in their video presentation, but they'll also use it with Substack. So one of the questions that immediately comes to mind is, what do you have any sense of what those proportions are when it comes to what how many people would prefer to be reading it versus to be watching or to be listening in the background while they do something?
Well, I think there's a mixture of things. There's the media, there's the medium itself, which kind of some people excel at certain ones, others don't. There's certain audiences that move from one to the other. And then there's the censorship algorithms that are unfortunately a heavy part of kind of what you need to look into. I think one of the reasons that a lot of people in the non-mainstream right have moved to places like Substack is it's pretty clear that places like YouTube are censoring very heavily, as you yourself, just noted it before we got started here. And so I think it's very clear that it's very difficult. There was a time where pretty much anything went in YouTube, and you could build a larger audience as a right winger. And I think there are still people who do well there. I don't want to just say, oh well, anybody who doesn't do well, it's censorship. I mean, there are people who excel, though they tend to be kind of more of the very mainstream, saying safer things, more less likely to avoid the algorithm and its censorship. But it's clear that there's a certain streaming audience, I think, that is still on YouTube. If you're streaming on YouTube, you probably have a decent chance. If you're chasing cultural commentary, if you're somebody who is bringing a right wing perspective to things like films or movies, TV shows, music, you could probably still do well because your main focus is, I think, an entertainment product. And even if you're bringing a view that is different, you could still, work your way into the algorithm in places and still succeed. But I think if you're trying to share more complex ideas, if you're trying to do journalism also from a more right wing perspective, I think it's pretty clear that Substack is a big platform for you now. The fact that it seems like they have a pretty open system, and the fact that you can immediately monetize is a big deal for a lot of people. You don't have to worry so much about the censorship when it comes to ads and other things in YouTube revenue. And so I think for a lot of people, that's a reason Substack is a big deal. Also, I think the fact that Twitter is less censored now. Obviously, censorship still exists on Twitter. Let's not fool ourselves. It's not a true free speech platform, but it is a lot more open than it used to be. And I think that means that a lot of people are able to build audiences there as well, who probably wouldn't have been able to do so just a year or two ago. I mean, some of them because they literally are back allowed onto the platform after being censored for a very long time. So I would say that Substack and Twitter are probably the places that someone who's trying to build content will probably see a lot of momentum. Does that say something about the written word versus the video, or does that just say something about the censorship versus the lack of censorship? I think it's a mix of both, but I think that the energy is definitely for the right wing in those kind of platforms.
Right on. Well, then now we can jump into the lore and the view from the inside. For those who don't know, the slate that I chose for this was a Spectre meeting, as represented in Thunderball, way back when in one of the James Bond films. So I imagine to myself as I speak to you that we're getting, a view behind the scenes, how it works in the Dark Empire in one respect or another. So I guess the questions that really interest me now. This is the first of them. Have you seen any evidence? And I'm certainly not asking you to talk about your own employer. I'm certainly not asking you to talk about people specifically, but just in a general sense, have you seen any evidence, and if so, of what sort, of the top-down imposition of narratives, the sort of linking the various utterances that come from the talking heads together, right? And I also hasten to add, I'm not suggesting that you're a part of this program, but being in that world, it seems that if anyone was going to see it, this would be the point at which, or the places in which you would see it. Have you seen this top-down imposition of narratives? Have you seen any evidence, perhaps in other companies you've heard about, or of this attempt to push a unified message to the detriment, perhaps, of facts?
Well, I would say this. First, I want to parse a couple things there because I worked at a relatively kind of ragtag outlet, an upstart outlet. The guy who ran it was a libertarian. This was not the most left wing newsroom in the world in the first place. But I certainly ran into a lot of people who were in established media franchises who definitely were far, Deep Blue had definitely had that bias, and that was being pushed all of the time. So my personal experience in journalism is, I would say that the publications I'm working for were left wing because they're all left wing, but only slightly so as compared to the ones that are really pushing kind of the message, as we would say, full speed. I would, from what I have observed, and this is still somewhat from the outside because I was only working alongside these people. I wasn't actually in these organizations that I think are a little more ham-fisted about their leftism. It's very clear that there is an expectation of what is to be brought. I don't know if these people sat down in meetings and said, "Here are the talking points we're getting from the council." You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know that there's a shadowy organization that has the kind of the bullet points that get handed out to every media outlet. However, I think that what we see, and this is why I latched on. I know a lot of people still don't like this, but I really think it's true. I think Curtis Yarvin was really onto something with the cathedral explanation for the way we find the world. The reason I latched onto it is it mapped on to my experience in the media. There is a expectation, there is a shared belief set, there's a shared value system inside the media sphere, and it's all extremely progressive. They all know what's going to advance your career. They all know what they believe personally and what the people around them believe, and then they expect them to deliver. And they know that if they deliver those things, they're going to succeed, and if they don't, they're going to fail. Also, these press offices are often very lazy. The people who are working there aren't, they're not some tireless, gumshoe reporter. There's some guy who just barely woke up from the bender last night to, bang out whatever, story they're trying to put together. And so they often write their stories directly off the AP wire, directly off of press releases, directly off of the poll abstract that has been sent to them by press offices. And so a vast majority of your news is already written before the journalist even touches the information they're getting. So in that way, could you say it's top-down coordinated? Yes, you could. It's there are definitely central distribution networks that kind of deliver the facts that these reporters are usually going to bring. But I think there's also an organic bottom up, or maybe I should say, maybe it's better to say not bottom up, but a distributed understanding of kind of what is going to advance you and what's going to be expected and what everyone is on board with. I don't know that anyone walked in to any of the papers I worked with or worked around or I worked in and said, we got to get rid of Donald Trump. But I know every one of them knew they needed to without anyone saying the words because they all shared those values. They all shared those concerns. And all the information they got came from sources that were clearly intimating that was the plan. And so I don't know if there's a direct top down 100%. Here's the things you need to say. I don't think that's the case. But I think that all the information that's filtered down to them and all the shared values that they have continuously push them towards the same message.
Yeah, I certainly saw something along those lines with the audio recordings. Perhaps you remember them. That what's his name? Oh, good gracious, it's hell to get old. The guy who ran Project Veritas,
James O'Keefe.
O'Keefe. Yes, O'Keefe had the recordings of the morning editorial meetings at CNN, and you could hear the different people calling in, and the people who were in the room together as, the various editors of whatever desk, were all talking at the same time in the mornings. And it was more along the lines of that distributed awareness that you're talking about, the sort of institutional awareness where you could receive your guidance, for example, from bringing up an idea and then hearing people at the table say, oh, yeah, that's interesting. Go ahead with that. Whereas if it were unwelcome, you wouldn't have a seat at the table at all if you weren't generally with the program as a matter of course. But if it were unwelcome, you would just hear a silence, and it would be like, oh, okay, well, let's move on. So, yeah, it does seem to be quite as you say. Well, now you mentioned this idea of the people who are pressed for time or lazy, in the course of their work. So it leads me to my second question here. Do you have any sense, and this goes for the right wing as well, in your current experience, as well as the the others, in terms of the Schmittian distinction. Do you have any sense of the proportions out there, if you just had to, guess, of original analysis versus this sort of, repetition of existing material? What do you think, or do you have any thoughts in general on this idea of people who are actually producing something new in some respect, rather than sort of acting as an amplification chamber?
Well, if you mean bring something new in the sense of like actual investigation and uncovering of things, it's incredibly small. It's minute. It like a single digit percentage is probably original reporting, original information distribution. One of the things that has happened in reporting in general, of course, like I said, is this kind of AP distribution trunk. You really only have Reuters and AP and a few other bureaus who have real reporters, maybe the New York Times, big papers that can actually put someone in the field and really get someone who's going to collect new work. The vast majority of papers simply don't have the money, the staff, or the level of competence or desire to go out and collect information for themselves outside of maybe their own area. So if you have, for instance, I probably did way more original reporting than most people as a local reporter, because I actually physically have to go to the meetings. I have to listen. No one else is going to do it. No one else is sitting in the fire board or the water management district or the city council meeting and digging out information for zoning and minutes and these kind of things to actually understand what's going on. When you're reporting on national stuff, it's almost always a restatement of information that's been gathered by other reporters. And of course, when you get into the commentary sphere, that's what it has to be, because you don't have time usually. I mean, there are a few people who are doing investigative journalism in the commentary sphere as well. You got your O'Keefes, you got your Rufos, you got some of these guys who kind of go out of their way to find these sources and dig deeper. But for the most part, obviously, especially if you're doing kind of a news of the day churn, it's very difficult to go out and investigate in detail many of these stories. And so, yeah, I think a large amount of what the news sphere is doing is just churning a small amount of content that's been gathered at a few main sources. And that's why it sounds like everybody's singing from the same hymn sheet, because they really are. There's only a few places, even a right-wing commentator in many mainstream outlets is just reading what the AP has told them and putting a slightly more conservative spin on it. They don't have any new information in general to deliver.
And what about this we hear a lot about, public-private partnerships. Um and this overlapping in the Venn diagram where state interests and putatively private interests intersect. Have you seen anything past or present, or heard about things past or present that illustrate that? That's something that many of us are concerned about. We've certainly seen quite a bit of it with the Twitter files and the interactions there, where you had state actors coming in and um, impressing the various organizations with the need to silence certain voices, or even conceivably to promote others. Where do you think we are with that now? We certainly had a great deal of it to deal with in the past. With the 2020 election, with the shaping and driving of the narrative subsequent to that, and we've also, of course, seen it, go through the roof with things like the COOF that I don't want to even otherwise mention for fear of yet another strike on my channel. Have you seen any of that going on? I ask because we're now heading into the election year for 2024, and I think it's probably not a coincidence that I got my channel strike here right as we were going into 2024 now, which kind of signals that we're going to be seeing the lid clamp down on certain things.
Yeah, I think we're gonna see a lot more of that. I don't know that I can tell people any more than the Twitter files did. I mean, those revelations are so deep and so important. They show a level of collusion that is, I mean, people like you and I probably already understood was there, but it's terrifying that, for most people who did not realize what was kind of going on, direct communications between intelligence agencies, federal law enforcement, social media, government press offices. It's very clear that on a regular basis, every large company is in constant contact with the government and media, and they're kind of organizing and orchestrating what's going to happen. From my own personal experience, I can say that every government office and company that I interacted with understood that the press was the most important thing they had to control. That understanding their relationship with the press, it was basically everything. What they could do inside the halls of government, what they could do with the levers of power, that was stuff they could do on their own. They didn't need to worry about that. They're manipulating kind of what the voters are gonna, that's old hat. That's easy for them. But what they were most worried about was the way that the media was gonna portray them. And so they were very careful on pretty much every instance to try to shape as much as possible information that went to the media to please the media, to make sure that they were on their side, that they were kind of always conveying the proper image. There's a very, very real understanding in pretty much every office when it comes to government and corporations that the media is a loaded gun, and it needs to be treated like that at all times. And so I think it's only going to, the power of these voices is only increasing. The power of these platforms is only increasing. Their ability to kind of sway the public is only increasing. And so I think that, yeah, you're going to see far more collusion, far more interest in making sure that they can influence each other. It really is a constant back and forth. The power doesn't necessarily just flow one direction. It's a constant interplay of these forces trying to influence each other because they realize this is where real power lies.
And given that that's the case, this is just a off the cuff question here, but given that that's the case, do you think that there are any ways that aspiring writers and members of the commentariat and the rest can take advantage of that or exploit that concern on the part of these institutions to manage their relationships with the media? It would seem to me that with a certain amount of experience with that, you would probably learn things about how to use that to your advantage. I was looking at some recent news. This got mentioned on Dee's Cocktail Hour last night. There's some recent news going on in New York that's, let's just say, potentially quite lurid, and that people on the right wing have a great deal of interest in. And it occurred to me, that there's a guy up in New York now who is in our circles who has a sense of humor and brains and could probably do quite well for himself going in and covering what's going on there from certain perspectives. For example, getting in touch with the police department involved in these events, which I won't go into further, that kind of thing. So, given that we have an absence of people really doing anything where they go out and put their, they pound the pavement and knock on doors and get direct responses, is there anything that you could say uh, people who might want to dig deeper could bear in mind or take advantage of in dealing with things like a police department or a local city council or whatever, given that they do have this concern about dealing with the press? How could we exploit that for our own ends productively?
Absolutely. There's a massive opportunity for people who are willing to do guerrilla journalism right now. Like I said, the press is very well controlled. The platforms are very well controlled. I think most people are aware of this, and a lot of guys in the kind of non-mainstream right, the dissident right, would have a hard time probably working themselves even to into certain conservative newsrooms. However, when you've got a camera and you've got a Twitter account that you can upload video to, you have a massive audience, you have a platform, you have the ability to break through. I mean, look at guys like Mike Cernovich, who kind of just built a name out of stuff like this. And you can certainly do that if you're smart about it and you are willing to pound the pavement. There are a lot of guys with solid followings who, who got where they are simply because they were willing to physically go to these events. We had a lot of course, clashes between Antifa and these kind of things. A lot of people filmed those kind of things and ended up blowing up on Twitter, getting a lot of attention because they were documenting that kind of stuff. And there's a certain level of discretion that you need to exercise in those situations. Make sure that you are not swept away of events, especially looking at the way that some people are being targeted after January 6th, even people who are not involved, who are simply, documenting in many cases, but just happen to be around or outside. You need to be aware. You need to understand what kind of events are unfolding and kind of where your place is in them, and make sure that you're in no way involved as someone who's documenting. But if you are willing to go into certain places, if you're willing to step up in the middle of certain events and being willing to kind of do that guerrilla journalism, get firsthand footage, get it uploaded to platforms like Twitter that are not going to censor it or are very unlikely to censor it, and where it can blow up and very easily you could put it in front of the eyes of somebody with a larger account, and that could spring and take off. I think that there's a big advantage, and that really sets you apart as a content creator, because again, I mean, I'm somebody who, does most of his content from inside his own studio. So I'm not bagging on people who do that. But if you are willing to get out there and get that original footage when there's a dearth of it, and you're willing to kind of put yourself in that scenario, then that's going to really set you apart if you're trying to kind of break out and make a name for yourself.
Right on. Well, I have a couple of questions here that are again related to like influence and relationships. My background is in advertising and branding and communications. I did it still doing it, as a matter of fact, now for 30-ish years. And one of the interesting groups that I interacted with, because there are many things that overlap here, marketing versus advertising versus PR. The branding, more properly speaking, even some things with motivating people within organizations. They're all fundamentally they're all related to communications in one respect or another. And one of the most long-standing relationships that I saw in the past was between what they call hacks and Flax, right? So you've got your PR people and you have your journalists. And as back in the late 90s, I've told this story before. There was a guy I knew who worked for a major soft drink beverage company, international one, and he got sent down to South Africa, because there had been some sort of major scandal involving how employees of this beverage company at some of their production facilities had been treated. And this was when Mandela was still in office. And this guy told the story that he made his name at this beverage company because he had been sent down there to act as a kind of damage control. And, this is something that many of us, certainly about, but at the time it was the first time I'd heard it. And I was hearing it from someone who himself had done it. But he created this snowball effect where I said, how do you change the attitudes down there as a PR guy? And he's like, well, you get down there and you get in touch with the news organizations or whatever, the smaller papers, and you sort of have a trajectory of headlines that you want to build, and you map the journals or the organs that you're going to promote these headlines through. But in a sequential way. So you have some sense of which ones are likely to draw on the other ones in terms of that local news. It kind of ties together with what you were saying. When you worked at a smaller paper, you're going to be the one, if anyone is going to be the one, because much of it simply just gets passed over. You're going to be the one who's going to go sit in a city council meeting or, listen when there's some sort of public announcement from the fire department or whatever, right? So naturally, there's kind of a sequence with how the papers work. One, looking at the ones that are beneath it, but it's not necessarily, I shouldn't say beneath it, because in this relationship, it's the flow from those who are more likely to be reporting about local issues and being more granular about them, and how they can move up the food chain. So to speak, if it's something noteworthy, it gets moved along to the next one. So he explained that he went down there and he said, basically, I knew I was going to start with a headline kind of like this one. And I knew that I could get it because I have the organization behind me. So I can do a press release about these events from the voice of the company. And so a certain number of journals are going to be willing to pick that up because it is news based on whom I'm speaking for. Sorry, I have no heater out here, so I'm getting a little bit cold as I speak.
I mean, I'm wasting away in Florida here. It's just absolutely freezing. So I'm barely making it.
Well, by my standards in balmy Alabama, this is cold. But the basically there's a sequence, and he talked about how he snowballed this headline that his employers had wanted to put out there in such a fashion, and this was his great, it was his great professional accomplishment. He had figured out what paper Mandela read each morning when he, before he went about his business. And he managed to get the headline that his company wanted into that major newspaper for the country on the day that Mandela was going to be reading it in the morning and then going to either address Parliament or have some kind of vote, right? So I mentioned that first off because the story is interesting in terms of what you can do and how you can do it reputedly. I believe you're already well aware of this sort of thing, but I wanted to mention it for people who are listening who might be interested, and I wanted to provide it as context to ask you, do you see today any of this relationship, this classic relationship that we're told about all through the history of both professions, between the PR person, and that could be a person like a Bernays, as well as someone, dealing with this stuff with Bud Light, where we see Dana White from UFC say, "Oh, Bud Light's the greatest," and Tucker sitting across from him going, you could see perhaps indirectly the hand of the Flax attempting to move through a mouthpiece for an organization and then hit the hack at the other end, Carlson. And here I use them in their technical sense. I'm not trying to say Carlson's a hack. But I wonder about your thoughts on this. Do you see any of this kind of thing going on today?
Yeah, I mean, the Bud Light one's a great one, right? You don't have a 1-2 punch of Kid Rock and Dana White back to back on Tucker Carlson's program with the exact same message about Bud Light by accident, right? That's not a weird happenstance that both of those people made up with that corporation at exactly the same moment. And I think that, again, this is a central part of the business, like you're talking about. The journalist is interested in content churn. They don't care about any given story usually, unless they're just a really dogged beat reporter. And so they're just moving through stories as quickly as possible, getting the content out, especially today when it's all about clicks and just clear the story, get the next 800 word article out so you can get a few more clicks and then prepare the next one. They're usually not taking a whole lot of time, and so a headline is very easy for a PR consultant to plan. I mean, we see with polling all the time, right? People will take polling seriously. Oh, look, the poll says that this guy's ahead or this guy's behind or whatever. And if you've ever written a story from a poll, what happens is this stuff shows up in your inbox from the polling organization. They have an abstract written out, and the abstract has basically the story already written for you. And what almost every journalist who's writing a polling story is doing is they're just paraphrasing the things that are in the poll. Now, if you actually go into the methodology of most polls, they have a spread of kind of error that is larger than the difference in the poll. So if you look at, oh, this candidate's ahead or they're winning by 5 points, often the spread of the poll is like 7%. There's a margin of error of 5 or 7%, or the sample size is ridiculously comically small or biased and targeted towards a particular area. And those aren't mistakes. Those are things done on purpose by the polling institute, by the people, the organization that did the poll, and the people who wrote the abstract to push a particular narrative. But because most journalists will never look anywhere beyond the abstract, they're never going to note the fact that this poll is basically useless and it was created entirely to push this headline. And once a couple of newspapers write the headline about the poll and the victory, well, the momentum is real, right? And now it's going to donors, and now the different campaign officials are changing their strategy based on stories that are basically planted by the polling organization in the first place. And so you will see this manifest on a regular basis, and so you can 100% trace that kind of development of storylines from a PR person, from somebody who is delivering those headlines or delivering that information through press releases to different journalists and outlets. You can trace that all the way back up to the actions of actual politicians and corporations, even though the thing is entirely produced by those PR consultants.
Right. So it's something that continues to this day.
Absolutely, it's a basic form of the business. If this isn't media, then in the modern day, then nothing is. That's exactly how it works.
Right. Well, then, w- a few last questions here. Then I know you have another interview coming up. One, I'd like to ask you about your expectations for the coming year, because I think you would have to, at this point, have your nose to the wind for what's happening, both in how it will be covered and what sort of things we might expect. But if I may, just a couple of questions first. One of them is, what do you think the darkest secret about modern journalism is that you would want to tell people from the inside, speaking as someone with exposure to the business and the people conducting it?
I don't know if it's a secret. I think a lot of people might be aware of this, but the thing I saw, the thing I was most struck by being on the inside was the fact that the journalists went in with a particular storyline, even though they knew it was false, and they would manufacture the situation. So, to give an example, when I was a reporter, there was the Charlottesville incident, right? You had everyone trying to remove the statue, and there was the Unite the Right rally and everything that was kind of connected to it during that time. And the journalists were all interested in trying to smear any given Republican politician with the idea that they were somehow connected to the events in Charlottesville. So what they did is they took Donald Trump's quote about find people on both sides, and they decided to try to apply that to every single person. Now, I was at a press gaggle with the Florida governor at the time, Rick Scott, and he was talking about some business that had been able to start because of some grant that the governor's office was handing out, and that was the purpose of him being there. But of course, the journalists, they didn't want to talk about that. What they wanted to talk about was the incidents in Charlottesville, because they wanted to go ahead and attribute this malice to the governor. And so all of the questions weren't about what he was talking about or why he was there. They were all about this event that happened very far away and had nothing to do with Florida. But he's a professional and he knows what to do. So he's trying to handle the spin. The people keep asking him, "Hey, do you agree with these people who rioted in Charlotte?" And do you agree with Donald Trump? And he's very careful the entire time with his language. He knows what they're trying to get him to do. They either want him to denounce Donald Trump, or they want him, to kind of mess up and side with the wrong people, and so they can label him some kind of Nazi or something. And he ends up, answering the question 3, 4, 5 times perfectly, avoiding this trap the whole time. Finally, one female journalist who had badgered him out about it 7, 8 times at this point gets him to reorder his answer. And it's still basically the same content, but he reorders it in a way where she can kind of manipulate the quote and try to make it sound like he supported these people or that he wouldn't denounce them. And that becomes the headline. And so she went in there with exactly the story she wanted to create. He gave the exact answer to counter that story several times, but she simply wasn't going to take no for an answer. And she made sure that she could go ahead and create that story by reordering the words. And the story went out, and eventually, the governor's office tried to get these people to retract, but it was too late. It was already out there. That was the national story. And even though my paper was the only one that didn't carry it, and we were the only one that told the truth, well, this woman ended up getting she ended up getting a raise, and then she ended up getting promoted. She went to Politico. She got rewarded for manufacturing this story, because that's what journalism is actually about. And so I think again, I don't think it's a deep, dark secret at this point for a lot of people. But the thing that you just need to remember in every situation is the press is the enemy. The press is hostile. The press is there to hurt you. And you should never step into a scenario like that and pretend like there's any kind of honest exchange there. They're there with an agenda. They're on the enemy side. They know whose team they're on, and they're going to get the story they want out of you. So be very careful anytime you interact with the press. Be very careful anytime you're reading the press, because what they're doing is manufacturing exactly what they wanted, and it often has nothing to do with reality.
Well, yeah, not a comforting notion. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, good. Sorry about that. I had a small technical issue. Thank you for blazing forward, Aaron. Right on. Okay, well then, before we get to expectations for the coming year, one last one is this business of returning to the world of journalism after this hiatus. What do you feel most positive about, and on the other hand, what do you think is the most frustrating thing, or the thing that you're most dissatisfied with? You could think of it also as, what do you think is well in hand at this point versus what opportunities are, however you'd like to come at it, since you're on the inside seeing it sort of play out professionally.
Yeah, again, it's a little weird because originally I felt like I was actually a journalist, and now I'm certainly in, I guess, news media in a sense, but I don't feel like I do journalism in the way that I used to. There's, I'm certainly inside the commentariat. I'm certainly interacting with. I'm on news programs. I appear, but I'm giving my opinion on them, and not, I don't have any. I'm not showing up with the revelation I uncovered at the local city council meeting or anything anymore. It's a little bit of a different mode of attack. I guess the things I'm most positive about is the number of people who never would have had certain platforms who are now being taken seriously and being involved. I mean, I was as surprised as anyone to find myself in this position. I've also noticed, guys like Paul Gottfried are suddenly, writing for major platforms. He's writing for the Blaze. I think he's supposed to be on, one of the major conservative cable news channels soon. I mean, there are people who have been in the woods for a very long time and been very unwelcome in kind of in mainstream conservative Inc. type platforms, who are being heard now and are being quoted. The fact that anons are getting to write for places like the American Mind, think tanks that have real influence inside the spheres. That's a sea change. It's very clear that for the first time in a very long time, the right is actually putting its toe into interacting with the vanguard. There's still a lot of hesitation. There's still a lot of people crying wolf. There's still a lot of people who are whinging and gnashing their teeth over the fact that some frogs are getting some attention. But the fact that, those influences are occurring and that there's a back and forth on a regular basis, that's a real white pill. That's a real positive step going forward. What are the downsides that I see? It's still clear that there's an effort for control. It's still clear that there are certain avenues that are blocked off. There are still especially inside. I mean, you look at some of the people who are trying to censor or trying to stop the fact that there's people voices getting heard. That's still very frustrating. But like I said, I think overall, even though obviously, anyway, I guess we'll talk about this in a second when we come to predictions. While I feel like the country is in a very dangerous place, I think that that also creates this opportunity because there's basically, I think there's a conservative audience out there that wants to hear these things. Like they are naturally, I think, open to these ideas, but we're denied access to them. And now they're finally getting them. And people are pleasantly surprised to find that I think there's quite a willingness to be receptive to the things that a guy like yourself or many people in kind of the online sphere would talk about. And I think that's a big positive for us.
Right on. Well, then let's turn to the oncoming looming wall of darkness, strife, and turmoil that is very likely 2024 before us. What are your thoughts as regards that? I suppose from inside the world of journalism and what and commentary and the rest, not to pin you down like that, but also outside of it. Since this is a world where you're not only making your own observations professionally and constantly, but you're also talking to lots of other interesting people, many of whom also have their ears to the ground.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're in for a wild ride. I think the left has memed themselves into a very dangerous place. I think that a lot of the rhetoric that they're using leaves them pretty much nowhere to go, and even probably more dangerously, leaves their opponents nowhere to go. It's very clear. One of the things I like to do on my channel is read some of the like most wide-eyed, rabid, progressive articles to kind of get a sense of where their language is going, what the rhetoric is doing, how it's building, and what direction it's moving in. And it's very clear that the Democratic Party and kind of the left are done with any idea of representative government. But they're going to defend democracy in air quotes, but it's very clear that they're terrified of the people. They're terrified of any input from the people. Populism is a real force. They saw Donald Trump. They're terrified of it, and they need to put it down. They are very interested in that. They want to remove Trump from the ballot. They want to imprison him. They are already trying to remove other Republicans, not just Trump, from the ballot using the same logic. This is the kind of stuff that brings countries to an edge. It's hard to kind of keep the illusion of popular sovereignty when you're removing the competing party. I mean, Donald Trump is we can say we went about the polls. We know they're unreliable, but by many mainstream polls, Donald Trump is not just the leading Republican candidate. He's the leading presidential candidate and beating Joe Biden by a good bit. If you strip a guy like that off ballots or put him in jail, I mean, things get bad quickly. And so I think we're in a situation where a lot of this is going to build to a fever pitch. I have to say there's a real chance that we're facing a constitutional crisis with a government that is very scared of its position and will do radical things to try to maintain it. And not a lot of hope in that area, but I think that's kind of where we are, unfortunately.
Well, yeah, let's see what happens. I suppose we're going to be buckled in for the ride whether we wish it, or not. We're all going to have to suffer through it. I was a bit late getting started. I know you need to get out in the neighborhood of 1. So I guess in closing, I'd ask, what do you have coming up? I know you have some things happening today. You've got an interview on your own channel. What do you have coming up in the future? I want to suggest that everyone follow you over on Twitter. That definitely people follow you on your channel here on YouTube, but I wanted to see if you could tell us what's coming down the pike.
Yeah, no, we've got Jonathan Peugeot is going to be on my channel as soon as we're done here. Really excited about that. I know a lot of people are excited about that discussion, so really looking forward to talking to him. We're going to have the Blaze is going to be having a quarterly kind of print magazine coming out. And so a number of us, including myself, will be writing kind of longer form pieces for that. So I'm excited about that. And then myself, I also have a book coming out here. As long as nothing shifts, it should be coming out in a few months. And the Total State. And so that's my first book that I've ever written. So that'll be very interesting. So if people want to check any of those things out, of course, got the show on YouTube and on all the different podcast platforms.
Right on. Well, thank you very, very much for coming on. I appreciate the opportunity to get a glimpse, inside your world. And it's always a pleasure to talk to you. I hope everyone will go and follow McIntyre over on Twitter and on YouTube and on Substack. And again, apologies about the business with the links. So, ladies and gentlemen, until next time. I am Semiagok, and I am